Hello everyone, my name is Meghan LeVota and I offer wisdom, tools, and support for personality integration. And today I want to discuss what happens when your personality is running completely on autopilot and why you might benefit from a more conscious approach to looking at not only your personality but who you are like. And so by personality integration, I just want to sort of clarify that what I'm doing with my channel and with my videos is discussing two things. One, your cognitive type, which there are 16 cognitive types, which is based off of Carl Jung's 8 cognitive functions from his book, Psychological Types. So obviously a lot of you guys know that, but I want to just reiterate one more time that the personality that I'm referring to is completely cognitive. I'm not talking about like your Enneagram, by the way, which is a more emotional based personality. But your cognitive type is completely mental. It's completely in your cognition. Everybody has feelings and emotions that are interacting with your mental way of seeing things. Even if you're a feeler, the cognitive functions FE and FI are still mental wiring that is helping you make decisions, whether you're a feeler or whatever. So this personality I'm talking about is completely mental. And so that's one thing I'm talking about. And then also what I like to do with my channel and my videos is I have a self-growth approach to things. And I'm inspired by Carl Jung's individuation process, where it's the whole idea of your unconscious and your conscious, and taking your consciousness, shining a light on what's unconscious and bringing those things to the surface and integrating them completely into your being, which whether you do that consciously or not, the unconscious is still going to be there playing a role. And so by personality integration, really I'm talking about helping people not be so much on autopilot and not just let their natural mental wiring call the shots without them even realizing it. Because if you can shine a light on all of your cognitive functions, no matter where they are in your stack, which we all do use all 8 cognitive functions, not all of them well, not all of them super consciously, but whether you know you're doing it or not, it doesn't really matter because the effects are still there and it's still in your unconscious. This process of personality integration is helping you put all of those mental pieces back together. And by back together, I'm assuming that, when we are born, we come from oneness, we come from source, so we're, one. So the process of putting it back together is sort of that integration that is talked about in a variety of different, schools of thought. But today it's like, I'd like to discuss, okay, so if my goal with my channel and like self-growth and all that stuff is helping you integrate, then what happens if you're not integrated? What happens if you're disintegrated? And I have a video where I talk about, I think fragmentation is what I called, like pretty much integrating yourself together, and then also the opposite of that, which is being more fragmented. When you're running on autopilot, all of the pieces of you are completely fragmented, and there is one aspect of you that is completely calling the shots, and that aspect is your dominant personality function. And most of the descriptions that you see when you're reading about the 16 types, it's mostly describing this sort of person where their dominant function is just completely calling the shots in every single thing you do. And no matter how much you grow or evolve, you're not going to evolve out of your dominant function. But you can integrate yourself to where this isn't like this autopilot unconscious thing where just one little aspect of you is calling all the shots without taking into consideration the totality of you. Which one thing I also want to clarify that I don't think I did yet is that, so yes, it's one thing to integrate your personality. That's just one thing. But you are also more than your personality. I would like to say that as well. And especially when we are talking about the cognitive types and the cognitive functions, these things are all mental. And so whether you're a thinker or a feeler, it doesn't matter. These cognitive functions are happening mentally, and it's the mind doing it. So really, when I say your personality, it's just like, how does your mind tend to function? How does that engine work? Like, imagine if you were getting like a computer, and imagine there were only 16 types of computers and they all could do the same thing, but the way like the algorithm was, or the way the code was, I'm not that into computers, the way that it was wired was 16 different ways. But you could use them all to do all of the same things, but it's that natural wiring that shows what our 16 types are. And like we're still more than that. And I know it's like, I'm the personality girl and I'm telling you there's more to your personality. Well, yeah, because it's like your emotions, your values, your fears, your experiences, your traumas, like how you were raised, like your personality is just such a small piece. And that piece gets even smaller when you are looking at just your dominant function, which is what most people do. You know, most people that you would say grow into a evolved person end up having a good grasp of their auxiliary function, and that's about it as far as human development. We have our dominant, and then we integrate our auxiliary. But whether or not you're aware of your shadow functions, whether or not you're aware of the other aspects, you're still going to be you still are going to have them subconsciously, and you still are going to be bumping into other people who use those, and your subconscious is still going to react. And when I say think about who you are really deep down, and there's an essence of you that is so much bigger and so much deeper than your mental wiring that you were born into using. And there is a way to, as opposed to having your personality completely call the shots, to use your personality as a tool to help your soul achieve its desires. So I know this might sound like a lot of fluff, but honestly, when you're talking about these sorts of things, there aren't that many words really to use. So I promise it's a lot more thought out than it might seem. And I'm talking slow because it's like, we have to really think about, who am I really deep down? What is this essence, this energy, however you call it, that is bigger than whatever your mental wiring likes to do? Because when your personality is running completely on autopilot, then you aren't consciously in control of your decisions. Your decisions are already decided based on whatever the wiring does. So it's like, if we were to look at this in the brain, like look at your mind, it just is very reactive, you could say. And it's very predictable. And that's why in a lot of cases people are predictable, and that's why some people use personality to try and guess what people are going to do, and some people use it to manipulate others, which I am very much against. No matter how you slice it and dice it, if you are trying to use personality to try and sneakily get what you want out of someone or sneakily try and control someone, that's evil in my opinion. Like, I don't condone that. I would condone being straight up about your emotions and your desires and trying to, find a solution with another person as opposed to controlling them. Anyway, that's a tangent, but what am I saying here? So when we're on autopilot, we are not aware of the totality of who we are. We're not aware of our essence. And our mind's most likely calling all the shots. Whether or not we're a feeler or a thinker, because as I mentioned earlier, both FE and FI are still mental processes that make decisions. Like for me, I'm an ENFJ, and my first cognitive function is extroverted feeling. That doesn't mean that I'm always responding with my emotions or other people's emotions. It goes so much more beyond that, because the cognitive function of extroverted feeling is objectively assessing the emotional data that is available around me, and including mine as well, and using that to make value statements that are objective or ethical conclusions that are objective. That's still all mental. And you might see ENFJs as really emotional, and perhaps because of the way that our FE is processing and concluding, we've decided that it makes sense to express our emotions. It doesn't matter. It's still a cognitive process, and it's still mental. And it's still my mind doing that. And I believe that the reason why so many of us are completely fragmented and on autopilot is because, and by fragmented I mean the opposite of integrated, the opposite of feeling the totality of you and making all your decisions consciously through the totality of you. It's because we think we've lived with this, with our functioning our entire life, and that's just how we cognitively are, and we think that that's right. Like, we think that that's just how it is. And I know a lot of us, before we even learned about what personality type is, we probably assumed that everybody worked like us. And let me talk about thinkers for a second, because I just explained how for me, my FE is still a cognitive process. For thinkers, a lot of times their mind is so in control of their decisions, and because they're so focused on their logical reasoning, they might not even know the way that their unconscious emotions are actually playing a role in why they feel that way. Because when we're fragmented and when we're not integrated, we're only focused on, our first cognitive function that is calling all the shots. And Carl Jung talked about the persona and how we over-identify and we over-inflate this persona. And that idea was sort of used to develop how, when we look at our cognitive stack, our dominant function is so big while our inferior function is so small. And that's just sort of how it works, is like we're so much more focused on one aspect of us. And as I've mentioned before, like, the purpose of integration isn't to get you to completely abandon who you are or abandon that autopilot, your natural self. You're never going to be able to change your wiring, no matter how no matter how much you grow, like. But the difference between being completely on autopilot and being more conscious is, do you at least know how your decisions are being made, or are you just doing the reactive thing you've always done? So I've made a video before about the about the 8 cognitive functions in your stack. And I shared how I believe that the dominant function, I call it the autopilot function, because it's what happens when you aren't thinking. You don't have to think to use it. It is like, some of us might even be surprised to realize what our cognitive function is once we've been typed, or however you discover your type. Some people are even resistant to thinking that that's their function because it just seems so, I don't know, normal. And that's sort of how it feels for people. It is really, in order to see how normal it is, you're going to have to look at the opposite, like your 8th function. So for me, my FE is my dominant function. My 8th function would be TE, which is the complete opposite of FE. Not on the same axis, but like the real like opposite. And in order to really see how TE does things, it really makes it clear how my FE operates. And what am I saying? If your personality is on autopilot, then you don't know that, like, when my personality has been on autopilot, then I don't know that TE exists. And so what I do, if my personality was on autopilot, I would go around invalidating TE like crazy. I would be invalidating their reality. I would be acting like what they're seeing doesn't exist. And I would be starting fights. And I would get even more self-righteous in what I see, and even more judgmental of everybody else. And that's what happens when the personality is on autopilot, is that you only see what you see. And you don't know why people do things. You're invalidating their reality. You're pretty much gaslighting them. And it's impossible to solve conflicts. And it's impossible to really communicate yourself in a way where multiple people can understand you. Because no matter how good your intentions are, people are going to see things differently based on how they process things. And I think that, you know, it's mindless, or it's thoughtless. And most of us do it. Seriously. Most of us, like, I want to say, like, you know, like 90% of people, you know, if you've been watching my videos for a long time and you are really, really aware of your personality and you're super into self-development, self-growth, then maybe you have integrated yourself more than the average person. There are other paths to this. I'm not saying you have to be into personality type in order to have gotten there, but I'm just saying, like, when we're looking at the world at large, most people are making these fatal assumptions all day, every day about how other people process, and not really realizing that the way that they process is different than the way that they do. And this leads to people crossing each other's boundaries, and it also can make people feel really isolated. Maybe they can even doubt themselves if they aren't going the self-righteous route. Maybe they think, I'm crazy. Maybe you think, oh, I'm surrounded by all these thinkers and I'm a feeler or whatever. And why is that? You know, what's wrong with me? Was I just made broken? And I think so many of the world's problems, I can't even get into all of it today. Like, wars start because of this. I mean, we cannot make conclusions that are the, like, win-win for everyone involved, because you simply aren't seeing the other person clearly. So you cannot make a conclusion if you are only seeing your short-ended perspective. And I think that a lot of people in the personality community over-identify with their personality. And how can we instead change the narrative where, as opposed to over-identifying with our personality and using it to make excuses about where we are, how can we instead use our personalities as a tool to help us get what we want and help us, make the world better, and instead have begin to see ourselves as a larger essence than just what your mind is reacting. Because I've talked before about how, is your dominant function proactive or is it reactive? And I would say that if your dominant function is proactive, that's a huge sign that you're really conscious over yourself, and you aren't just reacting with the way that you were designed in a unconscious way. Because if we can get proactive and not let our personalities rule us, but instead I look at myself as the essence of who I am, and I think, what do I want to do? Oh, I want to help people. Okay, cool. Well, how do I want to help people? Well, these are my skills. These are my interests. These are the problems I see in the world. This is how I could be a good fit. Okay, so I have some goals. What do I do? Well, I'll just tell you that if you are only using your dominant function, you probably won't get where you want to go. Because nowhere worth going is going to be so easy that you won't have to try at least a little bit to get there. And it's like, in order for me to have gotten anywhere in life, to achieve any goal, it's like, I'm gonna have to use my thinking functions. I'm sorry, like, I can't just be thinking about everyone's feelings all day long, because that's not gonna get me where I want to go. And nobody can get where they want to go just using their dominant function. And that's the truth, is that if, let's say I, as an ENFJ, am like, okay, I've decided that I want to, start this business and help people. Okay, so do you think that I could get there by just reacting with FE and just doing what people want? What if I only asked all of you guys what you wanted? What if I only looked at best practices? What if I only was reacting to what I think would make people happy? What if I was only, what if I cared about what people think all day long and never worked on myself or never came up with my own conclusions? Like, what if I didn't ever use an eye to think about, how to innovate something and see like a clear path to the future? I don't think that I would get where I wanted to go if I had a goal and every single obstacle that came my way, if I just responded reactively with FE. I don't think that I would get there. And that's the strategy that so many of us are using, is just something comes up, okay, dominant function, just like smack it in the face. You smack every problem in the face with your dominant function. See where that gets you. Seriously. I don't think it's going to get you where you want to go. Because the reality is, situations call for different ways of thinking and different skills. And I'm not saying that you have to turn into this sort of transcend your entire self and not do the things that come naturally to you, because what my FE dominant has concluded, is, I can stretch myself in some ways, but also I can ask for help in other ways. And no matter what type you are, you're gonna probably need to ask for help in order to get anywhere you want to go. And you can only know that by being conscious of who you are and your personality, and realizing I don't have the desire to do this, or I do have the desire to do this. And those are some more emotional or intuitive clues hidden in you that kind of have nothing to do with your cognition, but I mean, do you ask yourself, do I have the will to do this? Or whatever, like, I don't know. I hope that this, makes sense to start a discussion. I feel like I've thrown a lot at you that are perhaps statements that I haven't really made in the past. So I invite you to just think that through. And if you have any questions about what I said, I would love to go deeper in another video. But really, it's just, it's not useful to anybody, no matter what, to only hit every problem that comes your way with your dominant function. And if you use your auxiliary as well, that is your growth key function, or I call it the growth key function. And that is when you start growing, and that's when you start to get more in control of both your judging and your perceiving. And that is sort of the key to starting the process of seeing your whole self. And I also just want to say it's not as complicated as maybe I'm making it seem, because the desire to want to see your full self is almost enough, in the sense where if you just try, I promise it's going to be a lot easier than you think. Because it's like, I know I'm sort of saying like, oh, 90% of people aren't doing this, but then I'm also saying that you should do it, and I'm not really telling you how. Well, I think that most people don't even realize how much in autopilot they are, and they don't even realize how reactive they are, and so it's not even like they're choosing to do that. And so I'm telling you that just to make the choice to be more conscious, it's sort of like just taking the mask off, just being willing to see what I'm even saying, and like thinking it through in your own self is almost enough to make a dent in sort of deconditioning your reactive nature. So it's not that hard. It's actually really simple. It's just that we've been so used to doing it that way that we don't realize how reactive we really are. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. And if you are interested in me answering a consulting question, you can ask me anything, and I'll send you like an personalized audio for like 15 minutes, going deep into your question. I also have a typing service and mentorship. So all of that is linked below, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for bearing with me as I was figuring out how to explain that. And yeah, have a wonderful day.